Well, good morning. I'm quite often late when I turn up for things, and I've had in the past to make excuses and had to confront some scenes when I've entered rooms being late, but I've never yet walked into a room to be asked if I'd had a threesome. So can I say thank you very much, Marilyn? I will attempt to slightly lower the temperature after that, because I don't think I could possibly hope to compete. So I want to cover quite a broad range of things that we think are affecting young people at the moment and where government might be able to do something, and then I'll try and take some questions at the end. I just want to begin by saying that I think this is probably the worst time, probably since the Second World War, to be young. This is the generation that for the first time can expect to do less well than their parents. It's a generation who the higher education minister said in his, if you haven't read it, talking about good books, David Willits in his excellent book The Pinch refers to it as the generation who are being ripped off by the baby boomers. They're a generation who are likely to be saddled by debt if they enter higher education. They face a much less certain job market, and they can expect real difficulties in paying for their pensions or entering the housing market. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I've got the answers today. I've got some suggestions, but actually I want to begin by acknowledging that the first thing that we need to do is be in a position to actually hear what young people and their carers are saying. And it does strike me that far too much policy is formulated with them on the sidelines without them considered at all. Now, as we've just been hearing, there are many factors which can determine our life chances, some much more severe than others, but it would seem to me the things that are influential in this are factors like gender. Many of you will be familiar with the concept of the glass ceiling, but actually today it's boys that are outnumbering girls by 3 to 1 in terms of low achievement, and the performance, of course, of white working class boys is where our attention is at the present time. Pupils from several ethnic minority groups all make faster progress now than white working class boys. Indian, Bangladeshi, Chinese pupils, they all tend to start primary school with lower attainment than white pupils, but they've caught up and generally overtaken by the end of Key Stage 1. And it's worth pointing out that, as I say that it's not all one way. Despite concern about working class boys, we should also be equally concerned about the performance of students, usually boys from the African Caribbean group, because of those white working class pupils who were in the top half of achievers at Key Stage 2, 76% are still in the top 50% range at Key Stage 4. But if you contrast this with black Caribbean boys, they've dropped to under 59%. In fact, good bit down on that in the latest figures. And you have to contrast that with the other groups I referred to, about 76.4 for kids from a Bangladeshi background, 78, nearly 79 Pakistani background, 87 from an Indian background. So something is happening to black Caribbean boys between the age of 16, and we need to know more about that. We need to know more about their role models, their family relationships, their contact with authority, and the transition to secondary school and the expectations of their teachers. And we need to recognise, as I say, that for white working class boys, they are now the lowest achieving group, a major problem, and particularly true all over the country, particularly poor levels of performance in some parts of the east of England at the present time. So that's, gender can affect it, ethnic background can affect it, but of course the key factor affecting children is poverty and the gap between rich and poor. And today there's a persistent gap between young people from less well-off backgrounds and their richer contemporaries. I was interested in some of the diagrams there about the brain, which you were using in a particular context, but actually that gap between rich and poor also begins to show itself at a very early age, around the age of 3, and it can extend through life. So in terms of income, 90% of pupils not claiming free school meals go on to education, employment and training. But free school meal pupils are twice as likely as non-free school meal pupils to end up as NEETs, not in education, employment or training. I'll get you later. That happens to me all the time, actually. Once it was my mother, you know. I thought. So, free school meal pupils twice as likely to end up as NEETs. And I'd like to remind you there's quite a lot of evidence now to suggest that becoming a NEET can do enormous damage to an individual's future prospect in the labour market, long-term, much lower wages, much higher chance of episodes of mental health as well. And by age 16, only 36% of children eligible for free school meals actually achieve 5 good GCSE results, including English and Maths, compared to about 63% of those who don't qualify for meals. And only 13% of children in care achieve 5 good GCSEs, and only about 6% of them go on to university. And possibly the saddest group of all, white traveller children who do worse than anybody. About 20% of them achieve no GCSEs or NVQ passes. So you can see quite a big impact in terms of income and poverty. And let me just say in passing, I possibly don't need to say this to this audience, but I'm not trying to stigmatise anyone who gets free school meals. I actually received them myself as a kid, but I'm referring to them because they're a widely used research tool as a measure of poverty, class and social economic status in education. So I commented there on the performance of children in care. This is a particularly disadvantaged group. Now we might assume that in many, although not all cases, children entering the care system have already experienced disadvantage, poverty, possibly family trauma. And since the local authority becomes the corporate parent, it might be reasonable to suppose that care would improve their life chances, but it seems to make it worse. And this is undoubtedly related to the quality of care received, rapid changes of placement, social worker, separation from siblings, placements at a long distance from family and friends. One of the lessons we need to learn from the child sexual abuse scandals in Rochdale and Rotherham is how many of these children were sent to placements at a great distance from their home authority and then virtually forgotten. So I'd say to you that the practice of exporting or transporting young people in care has to stop. And of course, if we turn to what is euphemistically called other arrangements, those of you with a social work background will be familiar with this, we find young people in the care system actually accommodated in bed and breakfast settings, some of the most vulnerable young people housed in some of the most woefully inappropriate accommodation, and we really have to end that as well. I want to say that I welcome the government's decision to build on the staying put pilots and extend the right to stay in foster care until age 21. And yes, and someone's bound to ask, those youngsters living in other residential settings should have the same right to remain beyond the age of 18, just as is now the case for foster care. In my view, it's only a matter of time before somebody takes this to the courts, and the courts will rule it's discriminatory. I would just point out that the staying put arrangement was part of quite a long developed pilot arrangements. We were able to work out the funding costs and implications. My advice to the government is to get started on a similar approach for other youngsters, because we will We can't have a situation where we can say you can stay in foster care till 21, but you're out in your ear if you're in some other kind of child care provision. So the die can be cast at a very young age and can be a result of many factors, which, as I say, include poverty, the home learning environment, regular routines or the lack of them, which I guess is something to do with parenting, family interactions, breastfeeding, postnatal depression. There's a huge list. All of these can have an impact on the cognitive gap, which can start to be obvious from as early as age 3. So how do we begin to address this? As I said, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I think there are some things we can do. Access to high quality preschool and primary education can have a compensatory effect. One longitudinal study that I read about suggested that such access can effectively help children to catch up by age 11, and this impact is particularly strong for children where general deprivation is the major factor. Affordable childcare and good quality early years provision makes a difference, hence the emphasis which the last government placed on Sure Start, and why making childcare more affordable is so important today, especially in addressing in-work poverty and helping parents to be able to afford to go to work, and thus preventing children growing up in workless households. Early intervention is crucial. Many local authorities are beginning, even in these difficult financial times, are beginning to develop ideas of broader children's centres, or as some of them are calling them, new family hubs. Essentially, we're talking about the prospect of co-locating services, building on a health visitor model which starts with identification at pregnancy and tracks mum and child through the early years with a focus on developmental milestones. This can obviously have all sorts of other benefits. One of the things I've seen most closely in a part of Birmingham is actually the impact it can have on women who are victims of domestic violence. It's actually a very good way of identifying people like that. So these community-based arrangements can give parents a convenient single point of access and reach a large number of families. Centres like this can spot at an early stage the families and children in need of support. And this investment can save money, quite a lot of money in my view, down the line. I was reading something the other day that David Cameron says that he justifies his Troubled Families programme at a cost of £9 billion because he calculates that when the savings against child protection, fostering adoption, court interventions, policing, healthcare, etc. Well, I think if the Troubled Families programme can be justified on that, think what a good early intervention programme could save. Since about 2007, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's Education and Poverty programme has been investigating the attainments gap for children from different economic backgrounds. And one of the things that struck me about it is it found that mothers all have high aspirations for their children at birth, irrespective of their social group. But the big difference seems to be belief. So by the time a young person is 14, only 53% of low-income parents believe their child will go to university, compared to 82% of parents from high-income backgrounds. So there may be an element of fatalism in this, but it also says to me a lot about our schools. Some studies have suggested that around 14% of low achievement can be directly attributed to the quality of the school. I know teachers don't like to hear this, but that's what it says. And that's why we need to put such a high emphasis on raising standards in our schools. Not only is it the best way to close the skills gap and raise the likelihood of good jobs in the years ahead, but it's an essential route out of poverty. And of course, children from poorer backgrounds can be further disadvantaged by their experiences at the hands of the school, the teachers, and other adults in positions of authority. And that's why we want professional, qualified people working in our schools. But it's not just the staff. The major policy instrument by which government can hope to address disadvantage in schooling is the pupil premium, which the present government claims as its own. I'll remind you, it actually started from a pilot programme under the previous government, but nonetheless the point is, if Labour are elected in May, we plan to retain the pupil premium. But we might want to see some changes in how it's used. It currently costs about £2.5 billion, that's about £900 per head per eligible pupil. Now, it's far too early to evaluate its impact because we don't yet know enough about how schools are using the funding. And this is particularly so in my own brief in relation to something like special needs, where there is no specific requirement to show how pupil premium is used to support a child with special needs. Just last week I was talking to a head in Birmingham who was confessing that his predecessor, possibly for good reasons, had simply lumped pupil premium in with general funds, which now presented him with a major headache about how he was going to plan his budget long term and what he was doing about this funding that was supposed to address particular issues. So if we want to tackle disadvantage and raise performance, then the policy instruments that we use have to be targeted in a manner that's designed to achieve those aims. And I know it's difficult for heads at the moment and that school budgets are under pressure, but there's no point in having a pupil premium policy if that becomes just part of the general school fund. And in terms of helping young people access training and the job market and realise their ambitions, well, you know, I don't think I need to tell you this, but there is a pressing need for proper careers advice. We must recognise the need for earlier and clearer guidance to support pupils and their parents and help them kind of navigate their way through the increasingly complex pathways that exist both in education and the world of work. And of course the UK has a long tail of low wages and low skilled work compared to other developed countries. This is because a large number of employers seek to compete by having the lowest costs rather than the best quality. In 2011, there were 4.4 million jobs paying less than £7 per hour. I think I saw somewhere that's gone up to 5 million now, actually. And the young are particularly at risk of low pay. Certain sectors, hotel, catering, retail, care, wholesale and transport are particularly associated with low pay. So we need to tackle that in two ways: the pursuit of a living wage and the enforcement of the minimum wage, and the pursuit of quality training leading to apprenticeships and continuous career development for those who prefer to start with a vocational rather than an academic route. That's why we support UTCs and the Tech Baccalaureate. We need a route for those sometimes referred to as the forgotten 50%. Not a term I'm particularly fond of, but I think it is true that the impression of the last government was that all the emphasis was in children who were going to make an academic route. We need to recognise that's not the way forward now. And if the country's going to compete in the years ahead, we need more young people entering high quality apprenticeships. That's just a given in this country. And they need to be prepared for that changing world of work. We keep hearing people talking about portfolio employment. Well, if we're living in the age of portfolio employment, we need to teach young people how to make that work for them without them being ripped off and subjected to 0-hour contracts or various elements of sharp practice. That's something we should be teaching in schools. We should be preparing them for this different world of work. And we need employers working with schools and schools that understand the local economy. And if we're going to raise the age of participation, we need to offer those who might well already be turned off by education, maybe as early as the age of 12 or 14. We need to offer them a lot more than the prospect of longer hours in the same old classroom until maybe the age of 18. So we need to start by recognising how hard it is to be young today. We need to listen to them. We need to celebrate their talents and their ingenuity rather than constantly finding fault. We need to acknowledge the research that's out there, factors such as ethnicity, gender, poverty, social inequality. And we need to address those findings, not just kind of hope we can wish them away. And that means we have to focus on things that do make a difference, particularly at a time of tight budgetary control. So that's early intervention, affordable childcare, a care system that actually improves the life chances of children, not diminishes them, schools that enrich and drive up standards rather than undermine young people and leave them to fail, and a route that goes all the way from vocational education to higher degree standards via quality apprenticeships. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but if we're going to be fair to the present generation and not be the baby boomers who've ripped them off, we need to get on with it. Thank you.